This documentary is a dramatized investigative reconstruction about how a modern monarchy could fracture under the pressure of secrecy, leaks, and algorithm-driven rumor. It uses verified public reporting only for broader context on how royal institutions manage credibility in crises, not to assert private facts about any real child. There are institutions that survive bullets, and there are institutions that survive only as long as people believe they are unbreakable. Monarchy is the second kind. It is a system built on ritual, continuity, and the careful choreography of visibility, because in a constitutional kingdom, stability is not only law, it is performance. And performance is fragile. When the performance falters, it does not always falter in public. Sometimes it breaks where the cameras are forbidden, behind doors that do not open for journalists, in corridors where even long-serving aides have been trained to erase their own reactions, in rooms where the job is not to feel, only to manage. It begins, as these stories often begin, with an absence that is too clean. No announcement, no statement, no gentle reassurance tucked inside palace phrasing. Just a child and heiress missing from the places she is normally seen. The family photographs that usually arrive like clockwork do not arrive. The school gates become quieter. Schedules adjust without explanation. And then, a man built by duty and air, trained for a life of composure, cracks in a way that can't be hidden, because the people who serve him are trained to read the smallest changes. A pale face emerging from a private briefing, hands trembling when they should be steady, eyes that don't look tired, but wounded. In the kingdom we are reconstructing, the public does not see him cry. The public never sees him collapse. But staff do. Protection officers do. The private secretaries do. And when those people start moving like they've seen something irreversible, the building changes temperature. Phones don't ring as loudly. Footsteps soften, even the air feels monitored. And for the first time, the palace doesn't feel like an institution. It feels like a family home trying to hold a disaster inside its walls. The trigger is not a scandal splashed across a front page. It is a delivery, sealed, direct, bypassing the normal chain. An envelope placed into the heir's hands without ceremony, without explanation, as if the paper itself is dangerous enough to require no additional words. He reads it once, then again, like a man trying to negotiate with ink. And in that moment, the heir doesn't look like a future king. He looks like what he is beneath the title, a father facing a question he cannot answer without blowing open the foundations of his own house. Inside every monarchy, there's a vault that isn't made of metal. It's made of decisions, what must remain private, what must never be confirmed, what must be denied even when true, what must be true even when denied. The public thinks those decisions are always political. Often they are personal. The most dangerous secrets are not the ones that embarrass an institution. They're the ones that injure a child. In our reconstruction, the child at the center of this story is a princess not yet old enough to understand the physics of power, but old enough to feel when the adults around her are lying by omission. She is bright, curious, observant in the way children are when they live inside ritual. She notices patterns because patterns are the architecture of her life. She notices how staff pause before answering, how conversations stop when she enters, how certain rooms are always locked, always off limits, always described as irrelevant to her world. And like any child who senses a forbidden door, she wants to know what's behind it. It happens in an unused room, one of those palace spaces that exist like a museum of the family's past. Shelves of old books, boxes of photographs, a desk that hasn't felt a hand on it in years. Nothing dramatic. No storm. Just an ordinary afternoon where curiosity outruns caution. A drawer slides open. Inside, a sealed folder. A memory device. A handwritten note on old paper. The kind of paper that suggests permanence. The princess doesn't understand what she's looking at, not at first. But she understands the tone immediately. This is not meant for her. What follows is not the cinematic moment of discovery that rumor merchants love to sell. It's slower, more believable. A child reading something she wasn't meant to read. then reading it again because her mind cannot accept what the words imply. A name appears that she does not recognize, a reference to a decision made for the good of the family, a line that suggests identity is not only birth, but management. And once the seed is planted, it grows the way doubt grows, quietly, relentlessly, turning every ordinary moment into a question. Children don't handle suspicion the way adults do. Adults compartmentalize. They rationalize. They delay emotion until later. Children don't have that luxury. A child carries doubt into dinner, into school, into bed, into the mirror, and so the princess begins asking questions that seem simple but are built like knives. Why do people whisper? Why does everyone look away when I ask about the past? Why does my name appear next to someone else's? Why does it feel like something about me is being protected? From me? When her mother realizes what the child has seen, the reaction is not anger. It's fear. The mother doesn't fear the press first. She fears the damage inside her daughter's head. The way a single document can rewrite a child's self-image. Because if a princess begins to believe she is a placeholder, a managed symbol, a product of somebody else's decision, then the monarchy is not just facing a reputational issue. It's facing an existential one. In this story, the heir tries to contain it the way institutions always try to contain a breach. Silence, counseling, tighter access, more careful schedules. The idea is to stop the story from leaking into the world. But the world does not wait for confirmation anymore. In the real monarchy, we all watch outside this dramatized reconstruction. Recent years have shown how fragile credibility can be when the public senses gaps. In February 2024, Buckingham Palace announced the king's cancer diagnosis and explicitly said the disclosure was chosen to prevent speculation. In March 2024, global attention intensified around royal communications in ways that demonstrated how quickly trust can be tested down to the level of official imagery and public messaging. And in December 2025, the king himself framed his ongoing treatment in careful language, speaking of a milestone in which his schedule could be reduced, with the palace describing a precautionary phase under monitoring. Those real-world examples matter because they show the modern dilemma. Say too little and rumor becomes king. Say too much and you turn private suffering into public property. Now return to our reconstruction. Because the most explosive element isn't what the princess found. It's what she did with it. She writes a note, not to the prime minister, not to the palace staff, not to her mother. To her father, a small folded page placed where he will find it alone, addressed in a child's handwriting, which is the most dangerous kind of evidence because it carries innocence, and innocence breaks defenses. Papa. And inside, not a tantrum, not rebellion, just one unbearable question that turns a father into a man drowning under his own crown. Do I truly belong here? In the corridor outside his study, staff hear something they are trained never to hear from the future king. A sound that is not anger, not command, not controlled emotion, but raw collapse. The kind of grief that doesn't perform. They rush in too late. He is on the floor with the note against his chest, as if paper could hold together what has just torn apart. Aides are ordered out. Devices are collected. Security systems are reviewed. The palace moves into containment mode not because it wants to lie for sport, but because it knows what happens when a child's identity crisis becomes public entertainment. But containment can no longer guarantee safety, because the modern threat is not only the leak. The modern threat is the algorithm feeding on uncertainty, turning a princess into a headline, turning a family wound into a national argument. And somewhere beyond the palace gates, the world begins doing what it always does when it smells a crack in a symbol. It leans in. For clarity, what you are about to hear is a *fictionalized investigative reconstruction. The characters and events are dramatized to explore how a modern monarchy could implode when a child becomes the entry point for an information breach. To ground the realism, we will reference **verified. Public * examples of how the real Royal household has managed credibility and health. Communications in recent years, a monarchy is often described as tradition. That's the safe word people use when they don't want to say the real thing out loud. The real thing is continuity engineering. The crown exists to look permanent in a country where governments fall, coalitions fracture, and public sentiment can swing faster than any cabinet can respond. But continuity has a hidden price. The institution cannot afford uncontrolled narratives. Not about health, not about succession, and absolutely not about the one thing that makes a monarchy more than pageantry. The line that turns a family into a constitutional mechanism, bloodline legitimacy. In this reconstruction, the crisis does not begin with journalists. It begins with a child Princess Lottie, and a private discovery that should have remained buried in the administrative sediment of palace life. Not a movie secret hidden behind a painting, but something more realistic, a forgotten file in a quiet room, a sealed envelope mislabeled, a digital device tucked away with old family material. A small oversight that becomes catastrophic only because of who finds it. The first stage of a palace crisis always looks the same. Contain the perimeter. Not for drama. For survival. Once the adults realize what the child has seen or suspects she has seen, the household does what institutions do under threat. It narrows access, locks down internal chatter, tries to starve the situation of oxygen. School routines are held steady. Staff are instructed to speak carefully. The child's appearances are reduced, then paused. The public sees only the absence. But inside, the household is living through something else entirely, the possibility that a child is now carrying a question that no protocol can resolve, because in a monarchy, an identity crisis is not just emotional. It's constitutional. If a child begins to doubt her place, she doesn't doubt a surname. She doubts the framework that has defined her since birth. And the moment a child asks, "Is this real?" the institution faces a nightmare, not simply that the public will speculate, but that the child will internalize the speculation as truth. Here's what makes this kind of situation uniquely volatile in 2025. The palace cannot solve it with silence anymore. Silence used to work because silence was protected by time. The public might gossip, but the record moves slowly. Newspapers printed once a day. People forgot. Now, silence is interpreted in minutes. If you want a real-world example of how credibility can be damaged not by a scandal, but by a communications misfire, look at March 2024 when major news agencies withdrew a Mother's Day photo issued by Kensington Palace after concluding it had been manipulated, prompting a rare kill notice and an admission from the Princess of Wales that she had edited it. That incident matters because it shows the modern environment. Audiences don't just consume official imagery. They audit it. They freeze frame it. They crowdsource forensic skepticism. And once that skepticism is trained, it doesn't stay confined to photos. It spreads to everything: health updates, calendar changes, family visibility, and the quiet gaps where imagination becomes a weapon. So in our reconstruction, when Princess Lottie's behavior changes: withdrawal, sudden refusal of public moments, the loss of her easy spark, the palace is trapped between two unacceptable options. Option 1, speak publicly. Deny rumors, reassure the public, and risk turning a child's private confusion into a permanent global identity debate. In the internet age, even a denial can lock the allegation into history. The denial becomes searchable. The denial becomes a clip. The denial becomes the entry point for 1,000 what-if videos. Option 2, say nothing. Protect the child from headlines today, but allow the rumor ecosystem to script the story uncontested until the child herself feels like the world knows something she doesn't. This is where the air, Prince William in your scenario, but in our reconstruction, the air begins to fracture. Because the role of a future monarch is to absorb uncertainty without visibly bleeding. But fatherhood doesn't work that way. Fatherhood is not protocol. Fatherhood is the instinct to protect your child even if it costs you your posture. And that's why the smallest object becomes the largest. Detonator, a handwritten note left on a desk. A child writing to her father not as a princess, but as a person who feels her world. Tilting, the reason this breaks a royal parent is simple. It forces the collision of two identities that the monarchy usually keeps separate. The first identity is the institutional one. We manage narratives for stability. The second identity is the parental one. We tell the truth to our children so they can survive. When those identities collide, you don't get a smooth press statement. You get a man alone in a room, reading a child's question and realizing that the palace can outmaneuver journalists, but it cannot outmaneuver the emotional consequences of its own secrecy. Now zoom out. Because this is where the documentary becomes geopolitical in the truest sense. In statcraft, the question is always, what happens if legitimacy erodes? Legitimacy is not only about elections. In monarchies, legitimacy is about continuity, whether people believe the institution is real, stable, and morally coherent. If a monarchy becomes associated with concealment around children, identity, and truth, it doesn't just create tabloids. It creates the conditions for a constitutional crisis, parliamentary pressure, public anger, and foreign disinformation campaigns that amplify doubt at precisely the moment the institution needs calm. And the palace knows this. That knowledge is why it moves so aggressively when credibility is threatened. We've seen in verified public life that the palace sometimes chooses disclosure specifically to prevent speculation from metastasizing. In February 2024, Buckingham Palace said the king chose to share his cancer diagnosis to prevent speculation, while emphasizing he would continue state business and official paperwork even as public-facing engagements were postponed. We've also seen the palace use controlled, bounded updates to maintain public confidence without promising certainty. In March 2025, the palace acknowledged a short hospital observation period due to treatment side effects, postponing engagements as a precaution, then returning the king to Clarence House, and in December 2025, the king himself spoke of good news that treatment could be reduced in the new year, with palace language describing an ongoing precautionary phase, continuously monitored and reviewed. These examples aren't here to claim equivalence with our reconstruction. They're here to show the operating logic. When credibility is at risk, the institution weighs truth against harm, and sometimes chooses a controlled dose of truth to avoid a toxic vacuum. In our fictional scenario, the palace's danger is that any official statement about Princess Lottie's identity questions would be interpreted not as care, but as confirmation of wrongdoing. Yet no statement allows the worst interpretation to spread. So the institution does what institutions do. Under impossible constraints, it delays. It compartmentalizes. It instructs staff to hold the line. It hopes the child's emotions can be soothed quietly, privately, with psychologists and careful parental reassurance. But the digital world does not respect private healing, and that is where the next turn becomes inevitable. Someone inside the machine, out of conscience, fear, or revenge, decides the public should know. And once that happens, the palace doesn't control the story anymore. It only controls how hard it will hit when it lands.